Okay, so for this tonight, we're going to be looking at Power BI as the data tool that we're going over. For this series, Amanda and I are going over a couple of different tools on the market that people often see or that you might come across in like the professional data realm or for like recreational data use as well. But kind of going into some of the just preliminary what each of the tools is, and also what are some of like the use cases for them. I also want to preface this, I'm not a Power BI expert. For this like series, we're just kind of giving kind of a tour of some of these different tools that are out there. So for an overview of Power BI itself, for some of the main functionality of it is kind of rooted in data analytics and reporting. Power BI is a Microsoft product, so it comes with kind of that robust backbone of a lot of integration with the different tools that are on the market through Microsoft for like Azure and some of the different kind of desktop apps as well can get integrated with it. Another feature of it is data modeling. For this, we're going to be looking at kind of some of the like reporting and dashboard capabilities of it. But for like data models themselves, there's also integration if you're into more of like the data warehousing and for using it. And another feature of it, kind of similar to some of the other just like well-marketed data tools, there's emphasis on how to share the actual outputs that you're making using the tool, and then also collaborating within different organizations for like how you're communicating what you've made. So you don't necessarily have to have the same software like on your computer to run some of the outputs that you're making. You can share them through different methods. And then another thing that I wanted to mention for this, for one of the things that's kind of marketed with Power BI is data security management with the tool itself, and in regards to like data privacy in organizations. So for this, there do seem to be a lot of different features in it where you can create like restrictions and things like that for how people are interacting with data in organizations. Oh, the other thing too, I can post, I think Amanda put in the chat already the link to our GitHub. There's hyperlinks in this for like references for where the information is pulled, if anyone wants to follow those links at a later time. For what we're going to be going over, I have the desktop trial of Power BI. There's also, we'll look at it like just a little bit. There are some features that you can work with like through the cloud from your like web browser, but for some of the like more robust tools or some of the more robust features that go with it, I found working off of just the desktop app was easiest for that. And then for another emphasis of kind of what we're going to be looking at with it, a lot of visualizations can be made using Power BI, and then for interactive reports for different people viewing the data, it's not just static graphs and things like that that you can make with it. You can create pretty interactive reporting with it. And also mentioned before, data modeling is a feature of it as well, kind of as the backbone of what you're using to make the reports that you have with it. And then another part of it that I wanted to bring attention to was that there are artificial intelligence features to Power BI. So we'll look a little bit at that. There's different things like you can ask like questions that go with your data, and it kind of takes in and learns from the data that you're working with. And then integration with different data sources. As I mentioned before, different Microsoft products. There are, for some of the different like data, different I'm trying to think, like data warehousing, like if you have information like in Snowflake and different places like that, there's also integration like in products that aren't like just from Microsoft.
Robert, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, sorry, Amanda, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm on the same page with you as far as terminology. So I've been using various aspects of this for a while now, and I just want to make sure I'm saying it the same way as you are. The features of what used to be Power BI like 10 years ago that are in Excel, get, transform, load, we're calling that Power Query. We're calling Power Pivot in Excel Power Pivot. We're calling Desktop BI the downloaded version of Power BI, and we're calling Power BI the web, the shareable version of Power BI. Is that consistent with what you guys are using?
For the most part, so Power Query actually exists across a number of platforms that are Microsoft based now. So you can also use Power Query within Power BI. There's also the Excel functionality, and you'll just hear us usually refer to Power BI Desktop. So it would be the full terminology as opposed to Power BI versus desktop. And as I chime in, you may even hear me refer to the online version as the web app as opposed to Power BI.
Okay, so you would call the web version Power BI or the web app, and you'll call the desktop version Power BI Desktop.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. So for this, the demo data that we're going to be looking at with it is something that is available in-house with at least like the trial of the desktop app. And I looked at a couple different data sets for just looking at sales data across the board, but the like in-house data that they already have available for kind of using it as a sandbox for what's there has a lot of different features that you might not necessarily find if you're pulling something that is kind of simple sales data that just has like sums and, for example, like dates of when things were generated. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. And then I just want to give some resources for accessing the different layers of what we're going to be looking at. So I've listed off like the main website for like Power BI as a product. There's a straight documentation resource from Microsoft that is what it sounds like. It's got a lot of different like layouts of all the different things that you can be looking at in Power BI itself. But there's also another resource that's Microsoft Learn for Power BI, which has a couple different mediums that you might come across with it. Like if you'd rather watch like a video with something or go through like an example project that they have set up. So that's kind of flexible there. And then for video tutorials, when I reached out about Power BI to like Microsoft to see for some of the different resources that like they would recommend. There's a blog called Guy in a Queue, but they, I think, primarily operate through their YouTube page, but it's two Microsoft employees who have a robust like library of different Power BI tutorials and kind of go into that. And then I did want to mention for the trial that I've got that I'll be showing. It's a 60-day trial for Power BI. And then I also want to mention, I didn't realize this until I was signing up for it. They do require either like a work or school email when you're signing up for it. But if you would rather like not do that, or if you have like restrictions from your organization, or from if you do have like an academic affiliation, there is a workaround if you sign up for like an Office 365 trial, which gives a different like domain for what you use that with. Robert, I see you've got your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I never put it down. I'll put it down now.
Oh, sorry. I like looked over and I saw it. I was like, oh. So for this, one thing I did for like just signing up for the trial, like I have like a blog on the side that has a not like at Gmail or something like that domain name. So if you do have something like that, you can use it to sign up for a trial without getting hassled too much from restrictions with that. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Okay, so exit out of this. So just to pull it up, some of like the links that we were looking at. There's just like the main landing page that was mentioned in the slide. So you can just kind of click through here. It's pretty intuitive for actually like getting to the point where you're signed up for a tutorial, or not, sorry, not a tutorial, a trial. And then once that's set up, you can download like the desktop app we'll be looking at. And then this is like the resource for some of the different platforms for like just jumping off point for Power BI itself. It has, you know, just some of the different features that get marketed. Oh, also I need to sign back in, but I'll do that later. And then we can just check out like what the online like interface looks like Amanda mentioned for like the web app. So for the desktop app, this is like what it looks like. And once you're starting up a new file, I do have like a file that we're going to be looking at that's already like built out, but I wanted to go through this just to show kind of what like first like looks with it. If you do have like a data set that goes with it. First starting out, there are a couple different options. There's if you have data in like an Excel file, or if you have data coming from a SQL server. There's also for like the what we'll be looking at, I use this like try a sample data set. And I'm going to click through some of these, but then like switch over to the other main file that I've been using. So for this, it gives you like a prompt for if you want to do a tutorial with it, or if you just want to like load up the sample data. So we'll do that. So one thing, once like the data that you have has been loaded up, like you can go through and select what you want to be using with it. So we'll be looking at this financials part of the data set. But the other thing, before actually bringing it into Power BI, you can go through, and if you know that there are modifications that you need or want to do with the data before you're even bringing it in, you can go through this like transform data feature. And then this will bring up the data itself, and then some of the different modifications for it. So one thing like right off the bat for data types, I know like working in data, I feel like that's something that like has the tendency to get changed a lot, or be something that we might want to change bringing data in. So it's fairly simple to change something like that with just like clicking in the upper corner for the different columns that you have in your data set. And you can see there's like what we're pretty used to, some of the standard like date time for different like types of numbers that you might want to be working with. So for this, let me see. I didn't modify anything for like adding a new column from the input that they had there, but that's something that can be used as well. And then there's also the ability, we'll just click into that. Let's see. I know for like if you want to like merge columns or have some kind of like logic that goes with it, like you can make those modifications as well. And I'm just going to click through some of these just so we can kind of look and see some of like the features that are there. So if you do have in your data, like if you have data that might need to be, I'm just going to X that out because we don't really care that it's 3 days old. If you have data that needs to be pivoted, you can do that from here, so you don't have to worry about kind of like grappling with that once you bring it in. So different like features that are there. I'm trying to think. I didn't really do. Oh, sorry, Amanda.
I was just gonna say I think it's in the view. Oh yeah. So this is a really interesting thing I just learned because I had to use it to profile some data, but you can profile data density if you select that that checkbox for column profile. And then Oh, I guess not that one. Column distribution
Okay.
and column quality. So these give you some really interesting insights into the density of each column. So for example, what I'm using that for is a client has this really big data set that is a standard application in a MySQL database. And they're not using all of the columns in the application. You know, they don't use some of the modules, they don't use different fields, whatever. And we're creating this data mart for them. So as we migrate into the data mart, we don't want to use extra processing power to bring in empty columns. So we're figuring out exactly what columns we want to bring in by profiling the density of that data.
We
Yeah,
figured that out a few months ago and have never looked back. It was like, oh my God, this exists. That's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
We used to always build that in Excel with formulas and little pictures, but like it just does it for you. It's so nice.
So one other feature that I just wanted to point out for like in this view is if you have certain parts of the data, if you go through and want to filter it or apply like any filters or anything like that before you actually bring the data in, like if you have a certain value for this one, for example, there's like this discount band. If we wanted to filter out like none types before we even bring the data in, you can go ahead and do that. And then I think the other thing is that applied steps that'll track any changes that you make as you're going through before like reading the data in. And then if you like find out, okay, like maybe I didn't want to apply something that was there, you can go through and get rid of like those steps before bringing the data in. And then the only other thing for this, you can do apply to pretty much like save out like the changes that you made there. And then close and apply will close the window and then like bring in the data. So I'll do close and apply. And then that'll present, well, it'll load for a second, but then it'll present over in like the window over to the right. So before getting into this, I'm just going to switch over to like the other file that I've been working with. That's just kind of like the preliminary part of it. But I just wanted to go through like some of the different just like features that are here and like interacting with the data and kind of how it can be customized. I think for like some of the different like tutorials and things like that that I looked at, I know one thing that kind of goes hand in hand with Power BI itself is some of the same kind of like intuitive or just like explanatory elements that you might see in other programs like Excel, where there's like labels, but there's also like multiple ways to reach the same like actions that you might be doing. If it's like from a symbol or if you're going somewhere from like the upper tabs up here. So the data itself that's loaded up, this is kind of what we were like just looking at. This has for each like column in your data set, it'll have another like listed item that's over here, and it'll say like how we're looking at the data. So there's the summation for a couple of these different elements in the data set. It's pretty basic for having kind of that example sales data where it has different elements like the cost of goods sold or sale price, profit, and then like units sold in years that are over there. But if we click like one of these, it will show us column tools that are available for what we're looking at. So that's where you can go in and customize like, hey, maybe I don't want to look at the sum of the data, but if you want to look at like one of these other elements for what it's actually showing. And then also for some of like the formatting, because this is going to something that could be like reused or could be used for a report. You might want to present something in like a different like view of like I only want this many decimal places versus I still want to preserve that in the data, so it might not be something you transform like initially. Robert?
Yeah, I see that you have profit by country there. It looks like a map. Is Power Maps native to this such that it even like it knows where Syracuse is and it knows the different counties in New York?
So for this one, in particular, I think it's just taking like the centroid of like the given country because this one, this data set didn't have like lat long data in it. I didn't try to like load up just like intuitively, like you're saying, like just if it was taking in like the plain text to like generate like what goes with it. So
Okay.
I'm not like really sure.
Yeah, so
Like if I was
actually,
to look up, yeah, Amanda?
I was just going to say, so Power Maps is native to this, or Power Maps is native to this. I believe they're powered by, so there's two things you can do. They have their native maps, and then there's also an ArcGIS powered map. If you have ArcGIS within your organization, there's a really good integration. So there's two ways you can do it. You can have lat long and go to whatever decimal point you want, so you can be very exact, or by district or whatever you want to use. And you can use zip code. And there are some other
Okay.
differentiators, like it does recognize cities, some counties. It recognizes
Yeah, I saw you
states
had
and
county in your data
countries.
set.
Sorry?
Okay. I saw that you had county in your data set, and I was wondering if it would create a map on New York for you because you had county. You'd have to tell it like, by the way, this is New York County, and you could just do that. I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for this one, this just has country for like the example that's in here. But yeah, I think
Oh,
that would,
I misread.
no, you're fine. I think that would be like cooler to see like on like a more granular level, like within like for like United States data or something like that. Um, I did just while we're talking about like the map feature of it, one thing I did want to point out was that I realized like signing for the trial, there are like admin rights that go over like the mapping feature in an organization. So if you like sign up for a trial and if you're like the sole person like in an org, you have to go into like the administration like rules for what it's allowed for Power BI because I know for some like organizations they might not want you pulling in like the external data like for this I think it's like being I know it says like OpenStreetMaps but for like the different things that's bringing in so that might be something that might need to be modified like in a trial setting. But for this, I guess so we can start like from there for the different visualizations that you can make for it. So this is kind of like a blank canvas of like what you want to design with like the data that you have. So there's all of these different features here for what kind of visualization you might want to create with some of the different categories that are here. So if you like know you want a certain kind of chart, you can pick that before feeding in some of the different features that are here. But once one is selected, you can like drag over the different columns that you want to use for it. So for this one, for example, it's showing like the main location being fed in from country, but then like the bubble size for what the data has is coming from profit data. And then for each of like the different visuals that you can find like through this, you can customize them with the like format your visual option that's here. And then this has a lot of different features in it, some of them aesthetic, like for this of style of like the map itself. But then there's other ones. We go to this where you can change like the size of the actual like markers that are there. And then depending on the features that you want to show, like for this, where it's just showing like sales data and it's kind of scattered, like a heat map might not necessarily be the best thing because the data is kind of spread out to begin with, but that could be something just to show different like degrees within the data itself.
Yeah, so a
sorry.
heat map, Robert, you said you're in healthcare, so a heat map has been used pretty extensively throughout COVID to indicate hotspots of corona. And so you could use that by zip code or by block, however you want to distinguish that lat long, and then you could indicate throughout the city of Syracuse or Onondaga County.
Yeah, I can see a lot of uses for this that we have in Excel and have done in Tableau. And it seems like it has that same Tableau functionality here.
So then for some of the different like graphs that are there, one of the things that I like noticed before getting too far into making a bunch of the visuals was using one of the features to create like a slider for like the date that's associated with the data that's there. So let me see, I think. I think, yeah, so the slicer that's here, so that can be available in, depending on your data. So for this one, the data itself, because there are so many unique values for it, it would give some of the different features of it. It could give you like a list drop down for it, or you can do something like this where you can like adjust the data and then it would adjust like all of the associated elements that you have in your report view for it. So that's something like, like I said, depending on maybe like what you want to look at with the data, like if you want to customize it. Like this data set in particular only has like 2 years from like the sales data itself. So that might not necessarily be something that we need to distinguish, but depending on like what your needs are for that, I think that's like a really good feature for somebody that wants to just like interact with the data and kind of see like what's there. And then let's see for this one, for like another example of like some of the different features that you can incorporate for the data itself, for like the labels that are there for this, I think, let's see. So we've got the legend that's there. I think it might be in here. Yeah, so you can toggle like data labels depending on what your data has. If it's something like in a view that would be something that's helpful, rather than just kind of looking at this and kind of estimate like, okay, this is exactly like 6.6 million for the data that you're looking at. But I think there's like a lot of like customization that you can get into like on that end. And then oh, I guess we can look at this as well with this one as an example, because the data set itself for like what I've plotted with this, it's just kind of like the aggregate of the sales per like month in the given year. It might not necessarily be something that you'd want to use with like these advanced settings, but you can do like if we were looking at like a scatter plot of different data, you might want to use some of the other features on top of it to plot something with it. So for this one, it's just got different things like median that would go with like the lines that are there. But some of these other just kind of like base like statistics that would go with the data itself.
Yeah, so an example for that would be like if you have a break even point for revenue, so you have to make, this much to break even, you can have that line as a constant straight across your graph, and then you'll see as you throughout the year, as you increase your revenues, you'll see that line surpass.
So then I think one of the other things, as I mentioned before, there is like a little bit of like AI integration with the data itself or with some of the capabilities that are there. So I think, let's say, yeah, if you like have a report set up like this, if you double click like in the report itself, you can type in like a question about the data. So if we did like something like check and see. Okay, so this might not have been the best thing because it just gives us like the different uh data over there. But so this would give you, it could spit out like a number or something with a different graph. So it says financial years for top 10 sale data financials. But then yeah, there's like suggestions that are here. So maybe we could look at a different one. So that, okay, that's not super helpful either because we know there's 12 months in a year. But yeah. Robert, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this, I've seen this before. I've never tried it, but is it, you asked it what year sales were highest. Is it basing that on your column names, or did you give it some more information somewhere?
I think, Amanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's grabbing from like the full data set, right?
Yeah, so it's effectively reading your data set. So it's inputting the column names and different summary statistics about your data set and using those with natural language processing to, in kind of a contextual way, respond to colloquial questions about the data set.
So if you had a column that was named sales counties and it was just text, and you had another column that was named sales amounts for the given year that we had from this vendor, and it was dollars, it would be looking at that data and those column names, and it would know that it's not the counties because those are just words.
Yeah, so it would know, like, if you were looking for, give me the average of the sales revenue, it would know not to look at counties because counties is a string and the sales revenue is an integer.
That's so scary though, because you've got an executive using that, and they type that in and they get an answer, but they're using like paid claims and not billed claims. And it, you know, like, I don't even know how to sell that to them. I would tell them to be like, you have to be so careful with that. How could that even be practical?
Yeah, I would recommend, especially, you know, this feature was introduced maybe a year ago, especially right now, these data sets that you use with the natural language processing option, they should be highly curated. So they should, you know, be views that are connected from the database, not connected to any like individual tables within the database. And those views should be very succinct in their use case. So it should be, you know, if you're looking to create an executive dashboard, those metrics that you bring in should not be calculated within your Power BI desktop. They should be calculated in your view. And then there's no question as you bring the metrics in from your view about what language you're using. And then, sorry, go ahead.
You're saying make sure your data set is very limited in scope.
Not necessarily limited in scope, but very standardized in language. Like I would also recommend pairing this with data governance, in which you create glossaries that are made available to your end users so that they can educate themselves on the language being used around that data.
Interesting, thank you.
So I'm gonna get rid of that feature that's here, but kind of on the same note of like some of the like natural language associations with it, I'm gonna take graphs and just make a copy of it. You can use, there's a feature, let me called Smart Narrative that can go with the graphs that you're using. So if you have like a given feature that you want to have some kind of smart narrative that goes with it, it'll spit out some text that would go with it. So this one might not necessarily like be the best example because there's a lot of different features to it, but I think try it with, let's see. So I'm just going to convert this just temporarily to. So yeah, so this has got a little bit more like text to it for the sales data, just like over a period of time, but it'll give you something like this where it's got kind of exact amounts for the data that you're looking at. So if you like we're trying to throw together like a report and you were trying to figure out, okay, so like what are some of like the key points that might be in the data that you might not necessarily know like to pull to begin with, you can like use this feature to kind of like give you some inspiration for like where to go from there. And then kind of like with some of the other like parts of like Power BI for like the customization. So you could go in here and do a bunch of different formatting with the text if you wanted to like use exactly what was there as something in like what you were looking at. Just go back.
And one of the things that Smart Narrative will do is it will pull insights out. So if there's, standard trending, if you're not seeing much change in the data, you won't see anything in your Smart Narrative. But for example, if you're doing auditing on like files for your data pipeline, and so it's just like ones and zeros of like error or no error, it will then over time pull out narratives like you error on this job every Monday at 10 p.m. So it'll pull out insights like that as opposed to just giving you narrative on all of the data.
Yeah, that seems super helpful. So I think I'm gonna look at some of the like other options here outside of like the report itself, but obviously like if there's any questions, like we can come back to this part. But for some of like the different options once you actually have your data in, if you want to perform different calculations on it, you can use the DAX expressions, which is data analysis expressions, through like Power BI to write out what you like specifically want to be doing with like the columns in the data. But before we look at that, there's also a like quick measure option, which has, if we click that, depending on what you want to work with, we'll just like look at the drop down a little bit for this. So like working with categorical data, it's just got some of those kind of summary statistics through like max and min, and then different options that might be good for time series data, and then some just like mathematical ones that could be useful. So like if we just hit one as an example for like addition, then this is where you can go into the like fields that you have loaded up, and then from this bring over like what you would want to use like for that measurement. But if you would rather kind of like type out to do that part of it, if we go to new measure, I think. So yeah, this will bring up the ribbon up at the top to, you would give whatever name you're going to designate to what you're using, but then for like the syntax of DAX, that'll have thanks Nick for joining. It'll have the different options that you can pick for the the columns themselves for like actually writing that out. And then there's guides for like the syntax of like using that as well. So I think let's just see what else is here. So for, like I mentioned, different places that you can kind of get the same output. You can go through like the visuals section up here if you didn't want to like go through and click like the symbols of things. Down here if you have something specific you are looking for. And then also for some of the different kind of aesthetic features that you might want, if you want like text or different buttons that go with the data itself. And then one thing I did want to point out, I think Amanda, you might have mentioned this like a little bit with like the integrations. So you can run like with the data that you have in here. If you have like Python installed on your machine that you're using Power BI with, or I'm not sure I feel like R would probably have to be the same, but you can run scripts like with the data itself. I know for Python, it's kind of working out of I think it works off like pandas and like matplotlib for like the integrations there, but it converts you would have to be working with your data converted into like a pandas like data frame to I think be able to use that. Oh, Robert.
Yeah, the thing we're talking about in the chat, I'm not talking about the Excel formulas. I'm talking about Excel's data model where you write in DAX. I'm not sure if it's the same dialect, I would say, in the two.
So I think in Excel, it's similar to the Power Query language, which is Q, which is a different language than DAX. DAX is more simplified than Q. So Q is what you use in the transformation window that Ashley had up at the beginning of the demo. So you can,
I don't mean that. I don't mean that part. I wonder if I could paste a screenshot. I'm not talking about the Power Query part of Excel. I'm not talking the part where you would use the transformations and the steps. I'm talking about the part where you can
like create
the hotkey is all
your own functions.
DM. I'm sorry, what, Amanda?
Is it like the area where you can create your own functions using it's a different type of language. It starts with a V,
Okay.
I think.
Really?
But
okay,
I know what you're talking about, where you can essentially create applications within Excel.
You can create relationships. It's what the data, I mean, if you have a Power Pivot, you have to have stuff in there. It's what the Power Pivot's looking at. So that's like, so I can't copy paste those functions and put them here is what I'm taking away.
No, but I will say that the contrary to many Microsoft products, the DAX language has a really good documentation and a fairly large community. So it's really easy to pick up. And as Sujesh put in the chat, it's not complex and it does show syntax errors and suggestions.
Okay, it's interesting how if you're in just like base Excel or here, you've got, well, you've got your formula language, you've got your Power Query language, you've got your data model language, and they're all different. And I guess maybe they're slightly different from Power BI to Excel as well. Okay.
Yeah, Microsoft seems to really enjoy making a new language for every product that they build.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna look at outside of like the insert part of this, if we go to modeling for this, if we go to the side tab over here. So I don't have anything like super complicated here. I just made another like data model to have date in there so I could do a little bit different like visualizations for like the dashboard itself. But for this like side of it, if you like have specific ways that you're gonna set up like the data models that you have, this is like where you can go through and do it. Like I said, this isn't robust at all or like a good like example to show you guys, but just to know that that functionality is there for like working with like this end of it. And just like aesthetic side of it, it's kind of like with PowerPoint or something like that. Like if you have like different like color schemes you want to imply, like for like the whole report that you have, like you can go through something from like the view tab. And I think the last thing, just for someone like the resources, if you don't want to like Google everything, there's like in-house just ways to hit the same kind of links from like the help tab that's in here for some of like the documentation or for some of the different elements. Like if you have like I know there's like consulting services here, so for like people that are like more intense about like what they're trying to do if they don't want to go through like the other routes of trying to get help with Power BI itself. But does anyone have like any questions or like any parts of this that they would like to see before we wrap up?
Just on a final note, Robert, at the beginning you were asking about differentiation from Tableau. And to me, a big part of the differentiation is the ability to, once you're in the web app, so once you publish your desktop version up to the web app and you share with your organization, it becomes highly collaborative. So other people can comment in the dashboard itself. You know, there can be a whole like chat feature introduced where people can talk about insights into the data, or like, I'd really like this to be that. And another interesting thing that, you know, is just aesthetics, but also becomes very important, is you can set style guide, like brand guides in your web app that push out to anyone using the desktop version connected to your organization's web app. So you can ensure that across all analysts that are using Power BI, they're remaining standardized across their branding.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have anything else?
I don't want to hog all the questions, so Sujesh or T. Dean or Hillary, if you have anything. I do have one more, but if you guys have things, then. Okay.
I did have one question. How is Power BI with large data sets? Is it fairly quick or slow? I mean, I guess it depends on how large, I know, but in general.
Yeah, so it really depends on how large, and particularly on long and wide tables. So once you get into significantly big data, like 10 million plus rows, it does start to slow down. It will take a little while. Like Ashley showed in the beginning when she hit close and apply, that data loaded pretty quickly. But if you have very large data sets, or you're creating a lot of complex connections across different tables within your data sets, that will take longer to load. My experience is, as you bring stuff into Power BI, it is better to bring as a view or as an individual table, as opposed to multiple tables, or write a SQL query, which you can do directly in that import process. And you can pull whatever data across tables and it'll just run your SQL for you, as opposed to bringing in ancillary columns that you don't need. I brought in a table. I was profiling a table the other day that had 398 rows and I think 120 columns. So it was a really wide data set and not very long. And it took maybe 10 seconds to load.
Okay.
More than I'd expect. Wow.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I will say that that goes on an exponential scale. So it might take 1 second for a very small data set to load, and then 10 seconds for anywhere between 0.05 gigabytes all the way up to like 2 gigabytes. It might take 10 to 20 seconds to load, and then there's a threshold that it reaches that it really does slow down significantly.
Okay, that's good to know.
If you double click one of those bars, do you get a spreadsheet?
So you have to right click on it.
Right click, sorry.
Yeah, and you can go to show data point as a table or show as a table. So this is that individual column. And then you can also show the entire graph as a table where it'll show the graph above. Yeah, so if you do that again and just click show as table, that'll show the entire graph as a table.
And then I guess that's one thing I just didn't like click on while we were looking at it, but there is, depending on like what you've got, like I think, oh, sorry, I've got it on calendar over here, but if you have like something specific, if you're trying to look at like your table again, like you can just click from over there. But thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't know that was there.
No problem. And just to get into it more specifically, when you show as table, it shows the aggregate that's available in the table itself. Whereas if you show data as table, it will show that individual data point, so that individual bar with the records in it. So not aggregated as individual records.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. If nobody has anything else, Amanda, I don't know if you have any announcements. I think the only thing I was gonna say is our next session, I believe, is on the 28th. It's looking at data IQ if I'm not
No, the next one is Looker.
oh shoot. Okay, sorry. Okay, the next one's Looker from Google. But
Yeah.
we'll have
So
it
we, sorry.
have one further down.
Yeah, so we have 3 more sessions booked out through, or 2 more sessions booked out through mid-July for Looker and Data IQ, and you should expect to see some addition. We're going to do about 5 more demos from what's on our meetup right now, and you should start seeing those in the next few weeks.
Thank you everyone for joining tonight. And I know Amanda posted the socials for pretty much Salt City Data Community across different platforms if you're not already if you don't already know where to find us. But,
yeah.
cool.
Great. Well, thank you everyone, and have a great night.
Bye guys.